My name is Helen Anderson, and I grew up in what I thought was the ideal American family. We weren't rich at first, but we were happy, just me, Mom, and Dad living in our modest starter home. My father, James Anderson, was the hardest working man I've ever known. He built his transportation company from the ground up, starting with just 2 trucks and gradually expanding into a successful business. I remember how he'd sometimes come home covered in grease because he insisted on maintaining the trucks himself in the early days. Mom, Sarah is her name, though I can barely bring myself to call her that anymore, worked as a restaurant manager back then. She was actually good at her job, though she'd constantly complain about it. One day, James, she'd say during dinner, pushing food around her plate, "I want to be a proper housewife. All these late nights are killing me." Dad would just smile and pat her hand, promising her that soon she'd be able to quit. And he kept that promise. When I was 9, Dad's business really took off. He landed several major contracts, and suddenly we were moving into this beautiful 2-story house in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. I got my own room, huge and bright, with windows looking out over our backyard. I went wild with the decoration. Pale purple walls, fairy lights everywhere, and this massive bookshelf Dad built himself. He spent an entire weekend on it, cursing under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear him, but beaming with pride when it was finally finished. Mom quit her job shortly after we moved, just like she'd always wanted. Instead of taking care of the house like she'd claimed she wanted to, she was barely ever home. It was always lunch with the girls or just a quick shopping trip or my salon appointment ran late. Dad didn't seem to mind. He was too busy with his company, though he always made time for me. Every Sunday was our day, we'd go for ice cream, and he'd listen to all my stories about school and friends as if they were the most important things in the world. The last time we had ice cream together was just before I turned 11. It was a bright spring day, and Dad was telling me about one of his drivers calling in sick. "Guess I'll have to do the run myself tomorrow," he said, finishing his cone. "Just like the old days." "Can I come with you?" I asked, excited at the prospect of a road trip with Dad. He chuckled and ruffled my hair. "Not this time, princess. It's just a quick overnight trip. I'll be back before you know it." I remember hugging him extra tight that evening before bed. "Love you, Dad," I said, not knowing it would be the last time I'd ever say those words to him. The next morning, he left before dawn. Mom was still asleep, so Maria, our nanny, made his coffee and packed him a lunch. I heard him start his truck and pull out of the driveway. That was the last time I ever saw my father alive. The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. I know because I was awake, unable to sleep due to that strange feeling in my stomach. I heard Mom scream from her bedroom, followed by the sound of something breaking, probably her bedside lamp. The next few hours are a blur in my memory. Police officers in our living room. Maria holding me tight while Mom paced back and forth, talking on the phone. Words like massive collision and died instantly floating around me like dark butterflies. Dad's truck had collided with a semi that had jackknifed it across the highway. They said he didn't suffer, as if that was supposed to make it better somehow. But nothing made it better. Nothing could bring back my father. The funeral is mostly a haze in my mind. I remember staring at the closed casket, not really believing Dad was inside. Mom put on quite a show, wailing and practically throwing herself across the casket at one point. Looking back now, I realize how theatrical it all was, but at 11, I thought that's just how adults handled grief. It was at the funeral that I met Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia for the first time. They looked so much like strangers, yet Uncle Robert had Dad's eyes, the same kind, crinkly corners when he tried to smile at me through his tears. "Helen," he said, kneeling down to my level. "I'm your father's brother. I'm so sorry we're meeting like this. Why haven't I met you before?" I remember asking, direct as only kids can be. A shadow crossed his face. "Your father and we had a disagreement many years ago. But none of that matters now. I had to come say goodbye to my little brother." After the funeral, Mom's grief evaporated like morning dew. Within weeks, she was meeting with Dad's lawyers, taking control of his company, and acting like she knew the first thing about running a transportation business. She started throwing around terms like restructuring and modernization, but it was obvious she was just making things up as she went along. I spent most of my time with Maria, who would shake her head sadly whenever Mom came home with shopping bags from expensive stores. "Your mother's spending money like water," Maria muttered one day while making my lunch. "Those poor drivers haven't been paid properly in weeks." She was right. Dad's employees started quitting one by one. These were men and women who'd worked for him for years, some since the beginning. I remembered their names, their faces, how they used to bring me little presents from their routes. Now they were leaving, unable to feed their families on promises and excuses. 6 months after Dad's death, Mom sold what was left of his company for a fraction of what it had been worth. She acted like she'd made some brilliant business decision, but everyone knew the truth: she'd run Dad's life's work into the ground. After the sale of Dad's company, Mom was rarely home, always out somewhere, and I spent most of my time with Maria. She'd started teaching me Spanish, saying it would come in handy someday. I spent a lot of time at the library after school. It was better than coming home to an empty house. Mom would breeze in late at night, sometimes smelling of wine, barely acknowledging my existence. "Oh, you're still up," she'd say, as if surprised to find me in my own home. Then she'd disappear into her room, and I wouldn't see her again until the next evening, if at all. Then came that Sunday night. I was doing homework in the kitchen when Mom burst through the door, giggling like a teenager. She wasn't alone. "Helen, sweetie," she called out, her voice thick with fake enthusiasm. "Come meet Richard." Richard was tall and wore an expensive suit that somehow still looked cheap. His smile didn't reach his eyes when he looked at me. "Helen," Mom said, clutching Richard's arm like a lifeline, "Richard and I got married last weekend. He's your new father. We're going to be a proper family again." "I already had a proper family," I said, my voice shaking. "I already have a father." Richard's fake smile disappeared. "Listen here, young lady," he said, his voice stern. "Your mother and I are married now. You need to accept that and show some respect." "You're not my father," I spat back. "You'll never be my father. See what I mean?" Richard turned to Mom. "Difficult child. Needs discipline." But Richard moving in was just the beginning. Within a week, his mother Gloria, his sister Janet, and his 12-year-old niece Madison had all moved in too. They took over the house like an invading army, rearranging furniture and changing the decor Mom and Dad had picked out together. Mom didn't seem to mind. She and Janet became instant best friends, spending hours shopping and gossiping. Gloria took over the kitchen, complaining about Maria's cooking until Mom fired her. I lost the only person who still cared about me in that house. Then came the final blow. I came home from school one day to find Madison in my room that Dad had built the bookshelf in, my room with the purple walls and fairy lights. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Aunt Sarah said I could have this room," Madison smirked. "It's bigger than the guest room, and I need space for all my things." "Get out," I screamed. "This is my room." "Not anymore," she taunted, throwing my books off the shelves. "Your mom says you're moving to the small room down the hall." I lost it. I lunged at Madison, and we both went down in a tangle of arms and legs. I pulled her hair while she scratched at my face, both of us screaming. Richard and Mom ran in, pulling us apart. "Helen," Mom shrieked. "How dare you? Go to your new room right now." "No. This is my room. Dad gave it to me." Richard grabbed my arm roughly. "Your father is dead," he snarled. "This is my house now, and you'll do as you're told." They locked me in the small guest room for 2 days, only letting me out for school and bathroom breaks. My books and things were piled in boxes in the corner. Dad's bookshelf was thrown out with the trash. Through the wall, I could hear Madison playing music in my old room, and Mom laughing with Janet downstairs like nothing was wrong. A few weeks after the room incident, I was heading to the bathroom late at night when I heard voices from downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows. "The girl is becoming more difficult every day," Richard was saying. "She's disrupting our family harmony. Have you considered finding her another home?" My heart stopped. "Another home? You mean adoption?" Mom asked, and my blood ran cold at how thoughtful she sounded. "I suppose that could work. She's still young enough." "It would be better for everyone," Janet added. "Madison's afraid of her after that attack, and honestly, she doesn't fit in here anymore." I ran back to my room, buried my face in my pillow, and told myself they couldn't mean it. Mom wouldn't give me away. She couldn't. I pushed the conversation to the back of my mind, convincing myself it was just talk. 2 months later, my 13th birthday arrived. I wasn't expecting much. My birthdays hadn't been celebrated since Dad died. But to my surprise, Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia showed up at the door. "Happy birthday, Helen," Uncle Robert said, hugging me tight. His eyes narrowed when Richard walked past, ignoring us completely. Mom had thrown together a hasty dinner, probably embarrassed that Dad's brother might judge her. The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Mom cleared her throat. "Actually, Robert, Patricia, I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to discuss." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "Helen isn't happy here," Mom continued, not looking at me. "And frankly, we're not happy either. She doesn't fit in with our new family dynamic. I've decided to put her up for adoption." The words hit me like a physical blow. The conversation I'd overheard hadn't been just talk after all. "I thought, since you and Patricia don't have children of your own," Mom continued, her voice casual as if she were discussing the weather, "you might want to take her. If not, I'll start looking for other families." The room spun. I couldn't breathe. On my birthday. She was giving me away on my birthday. Uncle Robert's chair scraped back so violently it fell over. "We'll take her," he thundered, his face red with fury. "And you, Sarah, are the most despicable excuse for a mother I've ever seen. How dare you?" Richard started to stand, but one look from Uncle Robert made him sink back into his chair. "Patricia," Uncle Robert said, his voice gentler, "help Helen pack her things. We're leaving now." Aunt Patricia wrapped an arm around my shaking shoulders and led me upstairs. We packed quickly, throwing my clothes and few remaining possessions into bags. I was crying so hard I could barely see. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," Aunt Patricia kept whispering. "We've got you now." I walked out of that house without looking back at Mom. She didn't try to stop me, didn't try to say goodbye. The last thing I heard as Uncle Robert closed the car door was Madison asking if she could have my new room too. The transition wasn't easy at first. I'd wake up in my new room at Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia's house, momentarily confused about where I was. But then I'd smell Aunt Patricia's coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen, and remember that I was home, my real home. The adoption process moved quickly. Mom signed away her rights without hesitation, which hurt at the time but eventually felt like a blessing. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia became Mom and Dad on paper, making official what was already true in my heart. "Helen," Uncle Robert said one morning over breakfast, "we enrolled you in Riverside Prep. It's a better school than your old one, and we think you'll like it there." I did like it there. Without the constant stress of my old home life, I started doing better in classes. My teachers noticed, and so did my new parents. They came to everything, every school play, every academic awards ceremony, every parent-teacher conference. When I joined the debate club, they sat through every competition, beaming with pride even when I lost. They encouraged me to try new things. Piano lessons, summer science camps, volunteering at the local animal shelter, they supported it all. Not just with money, but with genuine interest and involvement. The pain of my mother's rejection faded gradually, replaced by the warm certainty of being truly loved. I stopped thinking about her, stopped wondering if she ever thought about me. My new life was too full, too happy for those old hurts to matter anymore. High school graduation came, and I had the loudest cheering section in the audience, not just Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, but their whole extended family who had embraced me as their own. "We have something to tell you," Aunt Patricia said at my graduation dinner. "We've been saving for your college fund since the day you came to live with us." They'd put aside enough to send me to any school I chose. I picked State University's business school, planning to major in investment management. College was incredible. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make them proud. During my junior year internship at Goldman Sachs, Aunt Patricia mentioned casually that she'd run into my birth mother at the grocery store. "She has a son now," Aunt Patricia said carefully, watching my reaction. "They're still in your father's old house with Richard's family." I just nodded, surprised to feel nothing but mild curiosity. That life seemed like a distant dream now, happening to someone else. After graduation, I landed a job at Morgan Stanley. My starting salary made my eyes pop. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making right out of college. The day I got my first paycheck, I went straight to the jewelry store. Uncle Robert had been wearing the same worn-out watch for years, and Aunt Patricia had been eyeing a particular pearl necklace in a local shop window. When I gave them their gifts, Aunt Patricia started crying, and Uncle Robert's hands shook as he put on his new watch. "You shouldn't have spent your money on us," he protested weakly. "Who else would I spend it on?" I asked, hugging them both. "You're my parents. You're the ones who made all of this possible." 6 years flew by after college. I climbed the corporate ladder at Morgan Stanley, earning promotion after promotion until I was managing my own team. Every success felt sweeter because I could share it with Mom and Dad, as I now called Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia without hesitation. The apartment came first, a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a nice part of the city. Mom helped me decorate it, and Dad insisted on checking all the paperwork before I signed the mortgage. Then I met Michael. A year of dating, and he proposed during a weekend trip to the beach. I said yes, before he even finished asking the question. Mom cried when we told them, and Dad pulled Michael into a bear hug. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We threw ourselves into wedding planning. Mom and I spent weekends looking at venues and tasting cakes, while Dad and Michael bonded over budget spreadsheets and vendor contracts. Then the message arrived on Facebook. "Helen, sweetheart. I've heard about your upcoming wedding. I know it's been a long time, but I'm still your mother. I've changed, and I want to make things right. Please let me be part of your special day. I miss you so much." My hand shook as I read the message. I immediately called Mom. "I saw Sarah yesterday," Mom said quietly when I told her about the message. "At the grocery store. She didn't ask about you, not once. But when I mentioned how successful you've become, how you're getting married, well," her eyes lit up in a way I didn't like. Mom hesitated before continuing. "There's more. That niece of her husband's, Madison? She got pregnant, married some deadbeat, and moved back into the house with her husband. The whole family is constantly fighting." Sarah was complaining about money problems, rather loudly, in the middle of the store. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. So that's why she reached out. She needs money. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as memories flooded back, the room she gave away, the birthday she threw me away, the years of silence when she had every opportunity to reach out but didn't. Finally, I typed. "Sarah, let me be clear, you are not my mother. You lost that right when you gave me away on my 13th birthday. I have parents who love me unconditionally, something you never managed to do. I don't want you at my wedding. I don't want you in my life. Don't contact me again." I hit send, then immediately blocked her. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd finally put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. The morning of my wedding dawned perfect and clear. Michael's parents had rented the Mason Creek estate for the ceremony, a beautiful historic property with sprawling gardens and a restored Victorian mansion. I was in the bridal suite with Mom, putting the finishing touches on my makeup, when there was a knock at the door. "Ms. Anderson?" One of the security guards looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation at the front gate."
My sister sternly announced, "We no longer need you here. Please leave the place where you work from home, you're just living off us," with a tone that signaled she was done discussing it. My parents joined in, singing the same tune in unison, "Get out. We're tired of you and your dog always being in the way." "If that's how you feel, I'll just do what I want," I replied, my mind already plotting my next steps. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Lisa, a 41-year-old single woman working as a freelance web designer. I can do my job from anywhere, thanks to the internet and my home setup. I have my own space to work in, and I enjoy the freedom of managing my own time." Despite loving my job, my life was disrupted 5 years ago, when my parents suddenly decided to visit me without notice. As soon as they walked into my house, they began to look around and soon started a conversation that hinted at major changes ahead. "This house is quite spacious, Lisa," my mother observed, looking around. "It almost seems like we could live here too." "And there's even a spare room," my father added. "It seems a waste for Lisa to live in such a big house all by herself." Without asking me, my parents had made up their minds in their typical manner. They seemed to think moving in with me was settled without even considering what I might want. I had never planned to live with them, and I made my position very clear. "Hold on a moment, I have no desire to live with you," I said, puzzled by their assumption. "What are you even suggesting?" My father's face flushed red with anger as he sharply retorted, "You've taken over this house, claiming it was from your Uncle Michael, and you're trying to claim it as your own. There's a limit to how low you can go." I tried to set the record straight. I didn't take it over. I had a proper discussion with Uncle Michael, and he willingly transferred it to me, I explained. Despite my protests, my parents had already decided to move in. They insisted, "Our old house is falling apart, and it's no longer suitable for us to live there." Given that my mother didn't work and my father's income wasn't enough to cover major repairs, they saw no other option but to move into the house I had inherited from my Uncle Michael. Faced with their difficult situation, I couldn't just leave them homeless, so I reluctantly agreed to let them move in. Once they settled in, however, they didn't hesitate to make sarcastic remarks. "Hey Lisa, you're already in your 40s, aren't you? Don't you have any plans of getting married?" They would taunt, always pointing out my single status. I find great satisfaction in my work and am truly content with my life. Yet the people around me often express concerns about my relationship prospects. They suggest that I should follow in my sister's footsteps, who has taken a different path in life. Contrary to their expectations, my sister's married life has faced its own challenges. Nevertheless, I remain unfazed, reassuring them that I'm perfectly fine with how things are. It was during one such discussion that my mother, who had been eavesdropping, decided to butt in. "Hey, don't speak ill of your sister like that. Unlike you, she's married and even has a stable job at a company," she interrupted. Defending my own choices, I replied, "I might not be married, but I am doing a respectable job too." My mother wasn't convinced and continued her criticisms. "You're always just messing around on your computer. You're probably making money through some shady means, aren't you?" she accused. Despite their doubts and criticism, I continued to live my life according to my own terms, valuing my independence and the career I've built. I quickly responded, "Shady? I'm earning my living honestly through legitimate work. There's no need to worry." My mother was not pleased with my reply and scolded me sharply, "How dare you talk back to your mother? You really are the complete opposite of your sister." This constant comparison of me to my sister by our parents was something I had become used to. While my sister worked a temporary office job, I had chosen a different path that allowed me to work from home. Although I knew our parents' generation might not fully understand the concept of remote work, it still hurt to be consistently belittled. However, one day while I was preparing dinner, instead of my perpetually idle parents, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. To my surprise, it was my sister Carol, burdened with a massive amount of luggage. Carol, what's going on? It's been a while," I greeted her, taken aback by her sudden appearance. "This is sudden, but I'll be living in this house from today," Carol replied with urgency. Baffled, I blurted out, "Living here from today? I didn't hear anything about this." Carol explained, "Didn't Mom and Dad tell you? I got divorced, so I'll be counting on you from today." Despite my initial shock, I tried to maintain a welcoming demeanor. Ignoring my startled reaction, Carol trudged upstairs and promptly claimed an empty room as her own. My parents sided with her, and I found myself powerless to object. From that moment on, my stress levels began to rise. Carol, after her divorce, had quit her job and spent her days speaking ill of me with our mother. "Hey Mom, isn't this dress cute?" Carol would ask, showing off her latest shopping find. "Oh yes indeed, Carol. You're so pretty, it will definitely suit you," our mother would respond enthusiastically. Then Carol would turn to me and remark, "Do you think so too? It's totally not something Lisa would wear, right?" Unable to escape their critical gaze, I continued to live my life without reacting to their taunts. Despite the desire to retaliate, I realized that it would only play into their hands. So I remained steadfast and unresponsive to their attempts to provoke me. One fine day, I knew I had to stay strong and keep focusing on my own happiness, regardless of the negativity around me. I found myself in a truly heartwarming situation when one of my closest friends became the proud owner of a litter of 4 adorable puppies. This significant event sparked a series of changes that would enrich my life tremendously. The moment I saw those precious pups, I felt a deep connection. After careful thought, I decided to adopt a little black Chihuahua from the litter. I named him Charlie. Charlie was a bundle of joy, his round eyes sparkling with mischief. Every time he looked at me, his tail wagged so vigorously, it seemed it might just detach in his excitement. I had always dreamed of owning a Chihuahua since I was a child, and finally having Charlie by my side brought immense happiness into my life. This was particularly true because I often worked from home, and Charlie's companionship provided a much-needed relief from the loneliness of my remote work days. "From today onwards, you're Charlie, okay?" "Woof," I declared to him, solidifying our bond. Caught up in my excitement, I didn't discuss my decision to bring Charlie home with my family. After all, it was my house, and I was fully responsible for all the expenses related to Charlie's care and well-being. I saw no reason for them to object. However, as soon as I introduced Charlie to my family, my parents and my sister Carol began voicing their concerns. They expressed their displeasure, upset that they hadn't been informed about my intention to get a dog. Some even mentioned their dislike for the potential odors that dogs could bring into a home. My parents and Carol were quite vocal in their disapproval, I recalled. "Hey, we didn't hear anything about you getting a dog," they protested. "Dogs smell, don't they? I hate odors," someone added. "Lisa, how could you just bring a dog home without consulting us?" They continued to scold me. Despite their complaints, I stood my ground and firmly defended my decision. It's my house, and I decided that Charlie and I needed each other. "His presence here is a source of joy, not a cause for complaints," I asserted. I was prepared to show them that Charlie's presence was a blessing, hoping they would soon see him as I did. I explained to them that Charlie wasn't some random street dog, he was a gift from a friend. I also emphasized that I was the one covering all the expenses for Charlie's care and maintenance, so they really had no grounds to complain. "What I choose to keep in my house is my business," I added firmly. "If you have any complaints, you're free to leave." Initially, their annoyance was clear. They were visibly frustrated and upset. However, within just a few hours, a miraculous change occurred. Charlie's undeniable cuteness completely won them over. They couldn't stop doting on him, playfully asking, "Aren't you cute? Are you mummies, daddies, or are you sissies? Look over here, sweetheart." It was as though their frustration had just evaporated into thin air. My entire family had fallen head over heels in love with Charlie, and his presence managed to bring about a remarkable transformation in their attitudes. From that point on, our home was filled with constant adoration for Charlie. Thanks to him, the previous hostility directed towards me began to fade, and I was able to enjoy relatively calm and harmonious days with my family. However, as life tends to go, a disruptive event occurred one day that broke the peace we had come to enjoy. While I was out running an errand, I received an urgent call from my sister, Carol. She sounded agitated and demanded, "Come back home now." Startled by her urgent shout, I asked her what had happened. She unleashed her frustration over the phone, shouting back, "It's not what happened, it's what Charlie did. He did his business on my clothes. What if they smell?" I tried to calm her down, saying, "Oh, just wash them quickly and they'll be fine. And isn't it your fault for leaving your clothes all over the floor?" Carol retorted, "What? It's my fault? It's your poor training that's to blame." I sighed, realizing that this was just a minor hiccup. "Enough, Carol. Charlie is still a puppy, you know. If you take him out for a walk, he won't do his business at home. You said you were excited to walk Charlie today, didn't you? Did you actually take him?" I had originally planned to take Charlie for a walk later in the day, but I didn't realize this decision would trigger a series of events that would throw my family into chaos. The core issue was that I hadn't fully trained Charlie, our beloved dog, and the consequences of this oversight were about to unravel. When I returned home, I walked into a home filled with tension. My sister Carol, clearly furious, confronted me immediately. Her anger was evident, and it was clear she had already briefed our parents about the mishap, as they too glared at me, standing amid Carol's now soiled clothes scattered across the floor. Carol, distraught, threw the soiled garments at me in a fit of frustration. "I'm going to charge you for the cleaning costs," she declared angrily. "Why should I pay?" I retorted. "It's because you didn't take him for a walk and left your clothes all over the floor." My parents quickly joined in, urging me to take responsibility. "Lisa, shouldn't you at least apologize to Carol?" they suggested. "All of this happened because of that Charlie you brought home." As the accusations continued, I couldn't help but defend Charlie. "Can't we give Charlie some slack? Puppies are like babies, they make mistakes sometimes." But my family seemed determined to blame me and Charlie. "This situation only happened because of this stupid dog," my sister snapped again. "Lisa, you made the right choice by not getting married if you became a mother. I doubt you'd raise a decent child." Her comments grew harsher, and my frustration mounted. "How dare you say something like that?" I exclaimed. "If you had taken him for walks properly and kept the house tidy, none of this would have happened." Finally, my sister reached her limit. She pointed at me and declared, "I can't take this anymore." The situation had escalated beyond simple pet mishaps to personal attacks, revealing deeper family tensions. Despite the hostility, I knew it was essential to remain calm and address each issue thoughtfully, prioritizing Charlie's training and our family's need for better communication and understanding. "I don't need you or this dumb dog. Get out of this house." The words struck me like a ton of bricks. "What?" I stammered in disbelief. "Didn't you hear me? I said get out. We don't need a home-wrecking freeloader here," my sister continued harshly. Her accusation cut deeply, especially since she knew all too well that I was currently without a job. I was stunned. Who did they think was covering the household expenses? It was me. As I stood there, bewildered by my sister's outrageous claims, even my parents joined in, supporting her view. "That's right, Lisa. Leave this house. Your presence only makes us feel worse," they echoed. I had reached my breaking point. "You're all jinxes. Just get out," they shouted together, their voices echoing off the walls. "That's it. I've reached my limit," I finally burst out. "If this is how it's going to be, just wait." With that declaration, I decided to take control of the situation. I quickly packed my belongings and left the house with Charlie wrapped in a towel. As I walked away, thoughts of revenge flickered through my mind, but I knew this saga was far from over. A few days later, as expected, my sister reached out to me in a panic. "Lisa, help! What happened to the house all of a sudden?" she asked, her voice filled with anxiety and desperation. Curious about this new twist in our ongoing family drama, I inquired, "What happened? Why do we suddenly have to leave?" "We were told to leave by the end of this month," she replied, her voice trembling with stress. The realization hit me hard, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the universe's way of teaching my family a lesson about compassion and understanding. Ah, so what's the problem here? Why do we suddenly have to leave? Carol's voice quivered as she struggled to grasp the situation. I've made the decision to sell the house, I told her firmly. I stated calmly, and Carol froze, disbelief clear in her trembling voice. What do you mean you've decided to sell it? You don't have the authority, she stammered. A month ago, the house officially became mine, a fact I had kept to myself until now, I explained. Yes, I received the house from Uncle Michael, and the title is in my name, I revealed, causing Carol to react with shock. You're kidding, right? Her skepticism was evident. Even if the title was transferred to you by Uncle Michael, you can't just sell it like that, she argued. I understand your concern, I reassured her, but right after you told me to leave, I consulted with Uncle Michael. He made it clear that the house is mine now, Lisa. He told me to do what I want and suggested I get away from the family as soon as possible. Carol was taken aback, struggling to process this unexpected revelation. What? No way, she muttered. As our conversation continued, I suspected my parents might be listening in through the phone's speaker. Soon enough, they began to voice their objections. Hey, Lisa, cut it out. We have no other place to live if we leave the house, they interjected, trying to appeal to my sense of family loyalty. That's right, Lisa. It's unthinkable to do this to your own family. If you're a good daughter, show some respect to your parents, they added. With a quiet but firm tone, I responded, Respect? What are you talking about? You've always looked down on me compared to Carol. Who do you think has been supporting your life for the past few years? You all had nowhere to live, so I reluctantly let you stay with me. My parents were momentarily silenced by my strong response. Without waiting for their reply, I contemplated the implications of my decision, ready to enforce the boundaries that were long overdue. I continued, Who treated me and Charlie like nuisances and kicked us out? It was you, wasn't it? Trying to drive out the original resident is shameless. My father, his voice full of plea, responded, Please, Lisa, help us. We're sorry. But I had had enough. I don't care. Fend for yourselves, I said resolutely. With that, I abruptly ended the call and blocked all my family members' contacts. Charlie, my loyal canine companion, looked up at me with a worried expression. I held him close and whispered, I'm sorry, Charlie, for shouting. It's all right now. I will protect you. I felt relieved that I had rescued Charlie from a family that had mistreated him. In the days that followed, I learned that my parents and sister had been forced to leave the house at the last minute despite their desperate attempts to cling to it. My father's meager income and my unemployed mother and sister made it impossible for them to maintain a decent life. Rumors circulated that my sister was constantly pressured by my parents to find a job, and their family relationships deteriorated further each day. While I had no interest in their living conditions, it was clear that their standard of living had plummeted since my departure. It was a classic case of reaping what they had sown, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Meanwhile, I enjoyed a fulfilling life in my new pet-friendly apartment, free to work on my terms without anyone complaining. All my earnings were solely for myself and Charlie. I was genuinely content with my life. Charlie, let's go to the dog park today, I said with a smile. Charlie seemed livelier, perhaps because that noisy family was no longer a part of our lives. From that day forward, I was determined to protect Charlie for the rest of our lives and lead a peaceful and happy existence.
My parents demand that I let my brother live with me and share my inheritance. I'm 24 years old, and frankly, I feel like I'm just a walking wallet to my brother Ted, who's 25. Growing up, it was clear that our grandfather, Gary, and Ted never really got along. Gary wasn't exactly the warmest person, but Ted had his own set of issues, like breaking stuff for kicks or just dropping dishes to see how people would react. It was like he enjoyed the chaos. Despite this, it never felt like my parents held him accountable. If anything, they just chalked it up to boys being boys, which never sat right with me. This behavior wasn't something I was taught to tolerate, and I certainly don't buy into the idea that parents are always to blame for how their kids turn out. Some kids like Ted just seem wired differently. Grandpa Gary passed away when I was 18, and Ted was 19. He left everything to me: the house, his car, a decent sum of money, and even his cats. My parents got some family heirlooms and a bit of cash from his life insurance, but the bulk of his estate came to me. We don't have other relatives like cousins, and our parents don't have siblings, so it wasn't a huge shock. Grandpa had made it clear to everyone that he wouldn't leave anything to Ted because, well, he thought Ted was a jerk. At the time, I remember overhearing my parents agree with Gary's decision, admitting Ted had always been difficult. He wasn't just difficult, he was a nightmare for me growing up. He'd mock me for my weight, steal my things, and even break my stuff just to upset me. After therapy, I've started to see how these experiences shaped my defensive nature. People have called me tough or even bitchy, but really, I'm just trying to protect myself from getting hurt again. Despite all this, my parents still had the audacity to suggest I should share my inheritance with Ted. We weren't even speaking then because of his constant bullying. When I refused, they acted like I was being unreasonable. But why should I reward someone who made my life miserable? After I moved into Grandpa Gary's house, things started looking up for me. I had my own space, managed to pay for college, and found a job I genuinely enjoy. Living on my own terms, I've invested the money wisely and kept a tight budget, enjoying a life Ted tried hard to keep me from having. Then last year, Ted waltzed back into my life. His wife had left him, and he was drowning in child support payments for his 2 kids. Since then, every visit to my parents' home has been a trial. They keep pushing me to let him move in with me and to help him financially, claiming that Grandpa Gary would have wanted it if he knew Ted had kids. That's just not true. Gary knew exactly what type of person Ted was. Visits to my parents are now rare and strategic. I try to time them when Ted isn't there, but somehow he always shows up, probably because my mom tips him off. Recently, he's been trying to cozy up to me, using every chance to hang out. We went to a bar once, and he immediately told the bartender to put his drinks on my tab, which I promptly paid in cash to avoid any misunderstandings. If Ted had been a decent brother, maybe, just maybe, I'd have considered helping him. But he's not. He's a leech, and I'm not interested in bailing him out. This might make me seem selfish to some, but I've fought hard for my peace and happiness. The last straw was during a family dinner when Ted tried to guilt-trip me in front of everyone, painting himself as the victim of our grandfather's supposed cruelty. My parents nodded along, urging me to think of family and duty. But as Ted spun his tale of woe, I saw the same manipulative gleam in his eyes that I'd grown up dreading. "I've had a really tough time, you know," Ted said, his voice dripping with a rehearsed sadness. "It's not easy being a single dad. I just thought, as my sister, you'd want to help out." The room was silent, everyone's eyes on me, waiting for me to capitulate as I always had when we were kids. But not this time. "Ted," I began, my voice steady, "I understand you're having a hard time, but let's not pretend you're interested in rekindling our sibling relationship. You're interested in what I can give you, not in me as your sister." My parents tried to interject, but I held up my hand. "I've made my decision. I'm willing to be part of Ted's life if he changes, but I will not finance his mistakes or his lifestyle. He needs to own up to his responsibilities." The evening ended with awkward goodbyes and frustrated glances. Since then, I've stood my ground, despite my parents' continued attempts to sway me. It's tough, seeing them so blinded by their favoritism towards Ted that they can't see the pain he's caused. So, here I am, seeking advice on how to handle a family that doesn't seem to value the same principles of fairness and accountability that I do. How do I maintain my boundaries without severing ties completely? Because as much as it pains me, they are still my family. But I'm tired of being the only one who seems to see Ted for who he really is, a bully who's never had to face the consequences of his actions. How do I deal with this without losing myself in the process? Now for the top comment before the update. Comment 1. You may want to put some distance between yourself and your parents. Make it clear you don't want to see Ted. If your mom texts him and he shows up, leave, then decline their next invitation. And be clear about why you don't want to see Ted. Your parents may be super resentful and say you're being a bad daughter or sister, but those feelings are theirs to deal with, not yours. It can be difficult to establish boundaries, but you can make this one. If Ted is there, you are not. Maybe a couple of years down the road, you can relax your position, especially if Ted improves himself. But for now, having him around is just causing you distress and giving him an opportunity to try too much of you. And that thing with the bar tab was seriously disrespectful. Comment 2. Weird family. You have there. What strikes me the most is how your parents keep trying to palm Ted and his issues off on you instead of helping him themselves. You say nothing the parents tried to do to help Ted modify his obnoxious behavior as a child? Work that they really try all that hard. Whatever. If your parents want Ted's debts paid, they should pay the debts themselves. You are totally right not to be sucked into your parents' efforts to force you to get Ted out of their house and support him financially. That being said, is it weird? I actually find myself feeling a little sorry for Ted. His whole life is effed because of his obnoxious personality and actions. Nobody likes him. Not his sister, his parents, his grandpa, his ex, and probably not his kids. The guy should join the military and go far, far away. And Opie responds, yeah, it's not a huge surprise. Ted has been overlooked for a bit, and they don't want to deal with him anymore. Comment 3. You seem to be handling this very well, Opie. Consider letting your parents know that you only wish to spend time with them, not Ted, that you will leave if Ted is there. They will try more than once to push the issue, but each time Ted just happens to be there, when you were told he wasn't. You walk. You remind them of the terms of contact them, and you know Ted, or you leave. Then you walk out of the house, the restaurant, the bowling alley, whatever, back to your nice life. Unless your parents really want nothing to do with you, they will be forced to compromise and see you alone. They will push the damned envelope like you cannot believe it at first, but they can't guilt you if you're not there. Leave. Opie's edit. The bar tab thing is just one example of the many things he's done to me. He's done other stuff like going into my purse before I moved out. He used to steal from me all the time. He was 19 or 21. He stole money from me the last time. The fact that he put drinks in my tab and tries to make me feel bad about my life doesn't make me love being around him. Update 1. Hi everyone. Some of you have been asking for an update, so here it is. First off, I got fantastic advice in a PM. I wrote down what I wanted to say and then informed my parents I would be over to speak with them. I outlined everything that Ted has done to me in the past, from stealing to bullying to making fun of my friends. I told them that he has not changed and I would not be including Ted in my life. Ted hasn't asked for custody of his kids and never wants to see them. He just needs money to pay back child support. He spent the money on himself. He had it. He just didn't want to spend it on kids. He didn't want any more. I let my parents know that I have invested the money given to me and was not going to be putting it towards Ted. When I die, the money would be going to a charity and that I planned to not be a cash cow for Ted ever. My parents were not happy about that. They told me they wanted Ted out of their house. He had been doing nothing but making their lives hard. I pointed them in the direction of a page about our state's month-to-month tenant laws. They gave Ted his formal get-out papers this morning. He has 30 days to get out or they will evict him. They wanted him to stay with me to feel less guilty. They thought I might be able to show him how to straighten up, if it hasn't happened by now. I doubt it would. I told them that they had screwed up by not fixing this when I was younger, that Grandpa Gary knew the type of person Ted was and left me the money for a reason. I wasn't going to piss on Grandpa Gary's grave by saying, "Here, Ted, never learn from your mistakes." Also, I hate Ted. I don't like being near him. I tried to hang out with him a few times just to see if he could change. Nope. Now he has the legal right to do whatever he wants short of a crime, and that makes him an even bigger a-hole. I'm an adult, and I can do what I like is a terrible power for a host to have. And Ted has it in abundance. He is a legal adult and a mental child. That's a bad combination. This is not to say my family is filled with saints. I learned a long time ago that I have some issues from my upbringing. However, I have tried very hard to overcome this. If Ted was trying, I might help, but he's not trying. I did, however, contact his ex and arranged to meet up with the kids to meet them. I let her know I wanted to be involved in their life, even if it's seeing her a few times a year. She told me that Ted said I was an abusive a-hole who stole his money. I let her know my side and clarified that she didn't have to have anything to do with me if she didn't want to. I just wanted to know my family. Their father being in a hall shouldn't mean the rest of the family is going to cut them off. She pretty much told me that she wants nothing to do with my family at all. My parents made her feel like a bitch for leaving Ted and demanded she let them help raise the kids. Knowing how Ted turned out, she wanted nothing to do with them, even if they are nice. She is afraid Ted will have access to the kids. From the sound of it, Ted might have been an unpleasant partner, so I sent them $500 for the holidays and to use in legal fees, letting her know it's not from Ted. Never was from Ted. Please do not count it towards payments owed. I also sent the kids a onesie and a little outfit, though they're too young to really know I sent presents. She thanked me and is going to be sending me some pictures through Facebook, and maybe I can meet them. She doesn't know. I guess she thinks I'm going to use this connection to help my brother. I let her know I actually want no contact with Ted, and he wasn't aware I had a Facebook. I also don't have my parents on Facebook, so it's not an issue. Hopefully I will be able to be in their life. If not, I completely understand why she might not want to. Anyway, I don't hate my parents. They have issues, but they usually are pretty cool. This has to be one of the most annoying things they ever tried to do. However, Ted getting kicked out is something I hope helps him out, as I won't be. So that's the update. Thanks for reading. Update 2. So things have seriously spiraled since my last update. Let's rewind to last week when my brother Ted decided to show up at my place completely unannounced. And guess what? He wasn't alone. He had a woman with him, someone I'd never seen before, and yep, a toddler in tow. I open the door, and there's Ted, looking like he's just lost his best friend, with this woman, Eliza, and her kid, who he introduces as Timmy. Ted lays it on thick. Hey, I know it's been rough between us, but we're in a real bind. We just need a place to stay for a few weeks, just until we sort something out. Eliza, Timmy, and I have nowhere else to go. His voice had that forced sincerity he pulls out when he wants something. I'm not buying what he's selling, not for a second. So I told them we needed to talk, but not inside my house. We stood out on the porch, me with my arms crossed, them looking all hopeful and misplaced. Ted, you can't just show up like this. And who are Eliza and Timmy? Since when do you have another kid? Ted's explanation was as shaky as a house of cards in a windstorm. He met Eliza a few months ago, and she's supposedly down on her luck, kicked out by her family, the whole 9 yards. Ted's playing the hero, which we all know is just a role he assumes when he's the one drowning. I laid it out straight for them. This isn't a temporary hostel. I can't help you. Eliza finally piped up, saying they really had nowhere to go because her family wanted nothing to do with her. I felt a twinge for her, not going to lie. I went inside, grabbed some local shelter information, and handed them a bit of cash to get by. Ted looked like he was going to explode, muttering about how cold I was. Eliza, on the other hand, seemed genuinely thankful. They left, and I was left shaking my head, wondering what in the world just happened. But the real jaw-dropper came later that night. I get a call from an unknown number, and it's Eliza, only now she's crying, and the story spills out. Eliza tells me she's not actually Ted's girlfriend. They met a few weeks back, and Ted concocted this plan, promising to help her if she played along to make me feel sorry for them. The kid isn't his. She's just a struggling single mom he convinced to join his little deception. Hearing this, I was furious. But honestly, it was just so typical of Ted, always scheming. I told Eliza she wasn't at fault and that she did the right thing by calling me. I reassured her to keep away from Ted and use the shelter resources I gave her. Now Ted's calls have been coming in, but I hit the block button without a second thought. There's no room for his drama in my life anymore. But this isn't just about not wanting drama, it's about refusing to enable his toxic behavior. Since then, I've been wrestling with what to do next. The temptation to blow this whole story wide open at the next family get-together is real. I mean, should everyone know what Ted tried to pull? Part of me thinks it's necessary, just to show how far he's gone this time. But then there's that little voice asking if it's even worth stirring up more trouble. Will it change anything, or just add more stress to an already strained family relationship? And it's not just about exposing Ted or protecting myself. It's about what these constant disruptions are doing to my own mental peace. Every time I think I've set a boundary, something else comes up that tests my resolve. It's exhausting, constantly having to defend my decisions to my family, especially when it comes to Ted. So here I am, stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, I want to keep my distance, preserve the peace I've built for myself. On the other hand, there's this part of me that feels obligated to fix things, or at least try to. Maybe it's because they're family, or maybe it's just that old habit of feeling responsible for the messes Ted leaves behind. Either way, it's a lot to deal with, and I find myself second-guessing my choices. Should I cut ties completely? Is there a way to maintain some sort of relationship with my parents without getting dragged back into Ted's vortex of chaos? That's where I'm at now, trying to figure out the best way to handle a situation that feels like it's constantly moving the goalposts. How do you deal with a family member who's more than just a nuisance but a genuine threat to your well-being? And how do you protect your own emotional health without completely isolating yourself from your family? Honestly, any advice or insights would be hugely appreciated because navigating this family minefield feels more daunting by the day. What's the right move here? How do I keep my sanity in a situation that feels increasingly insane? It's a puzzle I'm still trying to solve, and any help piecing it together would be a godsend. Update 3. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around for another update. You wouldn't believe how things have spiraled even further since my last post. I thought I'd seen it all, but apparently there's no end to the drama when Ted's involved. So here's the rundown. Not long after the last debacle, I got a call from my parents asking me to come over for what they described as a very important family discussion. Given everything that's been going down, I was naturally a bit skeptical, but I figured maybe they were finally ready to see things from my perspective. Boy, was I wrong. I showed up at their house, and it was like walking into a surprise party that you wish you hadn't been invited to. Not only were my parents there, ready with what looked like a rehearsed list of concerns, but Ted was there too. And they had even pulled in a couple of aunts and uncles and some cousins I hadn't seen in forever. The room was tense. Everyone seemed to be tiptoeing around, avoiding eye contact until we all sat down. The discussion kicked off with my mom saying they were all concerned about me, which quickly turned into a full-blown critique session about how I was handling the situation with Ted. According to them, I was being too harsh, not understanding enough of poor Ted's struggles. My dad joined in, painting a picture of Ted as this lost soul who needed just a bit more support from his family, especially his sister. Yep, that's me. Ted, of course, was eating it up, looking all somber and misunderstood. He had his act down, portraying himself as the victim, downtrodden by not just life, but his cruel sister who had everything. Apparently, Grandpa's house and a bit of peace count as everything these days. As they laid into me, I felt this mix of anger and disbelief. How could they twist the situation like this? It was surreal, watching them take Ted's side after everything he'd done. When it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. This isn't about family concern. This is about you guys refusing to see Ted for who he really is. He's not just messing up because life is hard. He's actively making choices that hurt people. I'm not going to support that. I'm not going to enable him. That set off a real storm. Everyone started talking at once, voices raised, with Ted jumping in to play the part of the wronged little brother, saying things like, "See, she just doesn't care. I'm your son too, but she got everything, and I got nothing." His performance was something else. I'll give him that. In the middle of this chaos, my Aunt Marie, who had been quiet most of the time, suddenly stood up. She's always been more of the observer type, but when she speaks, it's usually worth listening. "Enough of this," she said in that no-nonsense tone that's made her the unofficial matriarch since Grandma passed. "We're not here to gang up on anyone. If you can't see that Ted has a part in his own problems, then what are we even doing here?" Her intervention cooled the heads a bit and got some of the family whispering among themselves, maybe reconsidering the one-sided narrative they'd been fed. But my parents weren't having it. They continued to push for me to reconsider my stance and think about what family means. I left their house feeling a mix of frustration and relief. Frustrated that the family I grew up with was so willing to turn a blind eye to Ted's manipulations, but relieved that I stood my ground, that I didn't let their pressure change my stance. Since that day, my phone has been a constant source of stress, buzzing with texts and calls from family members. Some are supportive, telling me they understand my decision. Others are just as manipulative as Ted, trying to guilt me into changing my mind. It's been exhausting, to say the least. I decided it was time to take a serious step back. I've been limiting my interactions with the family to those who understand and respect my position. As for Ted, despite his attempts to reach me through various means, apologies one day, accusations the next, I've kept my distance. The whole situation has made me reevaluate a lot of my relationships, not just with Ted, but with everyone in my family. It's tough, realizing that the people you grew up with who should have your back can just as easily stab you in it if it suits them. But it's also been clarifying in a way. I'm seeing more clearly who I can trust and who I need to keep at arm's length. For now, I'm focusing on my own life, my job, my friends, my personal projects. Building a life that isn't defined by family drama is my #1 priority. It's not easy, and some days are harder than others, especially when I think about how things used to be. But I know I'm making the right decision for my well-being. Thanks again for all the advice and support. It's been invaluable during this insane period. I'm taking things one day at a time, and while I'm not sure what the future holds with my family, I know I'm heading in a direction that's healthier for me. I'll keep you all posted as things develop, but for now, just know that I'm hanging in there, staying true to myself and trying to find peace amidst the chaos. Update 4. After that last major clash with my family, I made a conscious decision to take a big step back from all of them. I really needed to breathe, to find out what life looked like without the constant stress of family drama. That decision wasn't easy. There were times I second-guessed myself, wondering if I was being too drastic, too cold, or too distant. But I stuck to it, because something deep down told me it was what I needed to do for my own well-being. The first few weeks of distancing were the toughest. My phone was eerily quiet, which was both a relief and oddly unsettling. The silence gave me too much time to think, to worry if I had made the right call. During this time, I threw myself into my hobbies, things I loved but had neglected for too long, like getting back into painting and hiking more seriously. Rediscovering these parts of myself felt like meeting up with old friends. I had forgotten how much joy these activities brought me, how they cleared my head and soothed my soul. As weeks turned into months, the new normal started to feel just that. Normal. I was less on edge, more in tune with what made me happy, and my daily life was noticeably calmer. This new headspace allowed me to reflect on everything that had happened without the raw emotions clouding my judgment. Then, out of nowhere, a text from my mom popped up one day. Just a simple, "How are you?" Nothing groundbreaking, but it was the first olive branch since everything had gone down. I was cautious, keeping my replies light and non-committal at first. Slowly, though, we started texting a bit more. I made sure to keep clear boundaries, and surprisingly, she respected them. We didn't dive into any heavy discussions. It was more about sharing little updates, which was a relief. Ted, on the other hand, has been completely off my radar. I heard through the grapevine that he moved in with a friend after finally being asked to leave our parents' place. He hasn't reached out to me directly, which I'm honestly grateful for. Whether he's genuinely started taking responsibility for his actions or he's just too preoccupied with his own life to bother me, I can't say. But the distance has given me much needed peace. My relationship with my dad remains strained. We haven't talked much since the intervention. I get the sense he's still upset with how things played out, maybe even feels a bit betrayed by my strong stance. It hurts, knowing there's this wedge between us, but I've come to accept that not every relationship can be patched up, or at least not quickly. Healing, if it happens, will take time. The family members who have reached out have mostly been supportive, or at least haven't tried to drag me back into the drama. My Aunt Marie, who stood up for me during that last family gathering, has been an incredible support. She's become something of a family mediator, ensuring everyone respects each other's boundaries, which has been a huge help. This whole experience has been eye-opening in a lot of ways. It's taught me about boundaries and the importance of sticking to them, even when it's tough, even when it means stepping back from people you love. I've learned a lot about myself, about my limits, and about what I need in my relationships. It's been a journey of self-discovery that I didn't expect but am grateful for. Looking back, I can see how much of my energy was being drained by trying to keep the peace, by trying to be everything to everyone. It's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. This break has allowed me to rebuild my life the way I want it, focusing on what brings me joy and peace. So, here I am now, a few months down the line, feeling more like myself than I have in years. My life isn't free from challenges, but the challenges feel more manageable when I'm not constantly weighed down by family issues. I'm taking things day by day, enjoying the calm after the storm, and slowly rebuilding the relationships that matter on healthier, firmer ground. Thanks for all the advice, the kind words, and the support through all of this. It's been a wild ride, but knowing I had this community to turn to has made all the difference. I'll keep you posted on how things go, but for now, I'm just going to enjoy the peace and keep focusing on the positive changes I've made in my life. Here's to finding calm in the chaos and to a future that looks a little brighter each day. Update 5. So here's the latest. Ted ended up in jail. It's still hard to wrap my head around it, but it happened. The charges: financial fraud, serious stuff involving forged signatures and conning money out of unsuspecting victims. It's like something out of a crime show, except it's real life. And the person at the center of it is my brother. The news hit me like a freight train when my mom called, her voice shaking as she explained what had happened. Through her tears, she relayed the details, and then, almost predictably, came the request that floored me. They wanted me to bail Ted out. After everything that had transpired, the endless cycles of manipulation and turmoil, they were asking me to step in and pull him out of the mess he'd gotten himself into. I asked my mom to give me some time to think it over, hanging up the phone with a heavy heart and a mind racing with conflicted thoughts. Part of me felt a tug of sympathy for Ted. Jail is no light matter, and the thought of anyone I know being in that kind of environment is unsettling. But then the larger, more rational part of me kicked in, reminding me of all the reasons I had distanced myself in the first place, of all the times Ted had chosen his path, heedless of the consequences and the people he hurt along the way. Those few hours of contemplation were some of the most introspective I've had. I thought about responsibility, what it means to really be responsible, not just for ourselves, but for the actions we condone in others. Could I, in good conscience, use my hard-earned money to bail out someone who had repeatedly shown such disregard for others? Was I obligated to help simply because we shared the same blood? The answer came to me clearer than I expected. I called my mom back and told her I couldn't do it. I explained that this was a line I could not cross, that Ted needed to face the consequences of his actions without me shielding him from them. It was an incredibly tough conversation. I could hear the disappointment and desperation in my mom's voice, but beneath that, a hint of understanding, perhaps. The decision not to bail Ted out didn't come without its own set of repercussions. I braced myself for a backlash that surprisingly never came. Maybe my family had expected my refusal, or perhaps they were too wrapped up in the crisis to muster the energy for another confrontation. Whatever the reason, the storm I'd anticipated didn't break, and in its absence, a sort of uneasy peace settled over us all. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired. There was a strange sense of closure in having made such a definitive decision. I realized that sometimes the most challenging choices are the ones that bring us the most peace. By saying no, I had not only reinforced my boundaries, but also reaffirmed my commitment to a healthier, more self-respecting way of living. Life has slowly started to find a rhythm again. I've been diving deeper into my hobbies and interests, reconnecting with friends, and generally trying to rebuild and reinforce the life I want to lead, one that isn't constantly overshadowed by family drama. My relationship with my parents remains tentative, marked by a newfound respect for my boundaries, perhaps born out of the realization that I am serious about maintaining them. I've also learned a lot about forgiveness through this process, not the kind that excuses harmful behavior, but the kind that accepts people's flaws while also accepting that those flaws don't have to dictate how I live my life. I've forgiven Ted not for his sake, but for mine, to free myself from the anger and disappointment that were weighing me down. And as for the community here, your support has been a beacon for me during some really dark times. Each message, each piece of advice, each shared experience has helped more than you can know. You've reminded me that even in our most solitary struggles, we are never truly alone. So as I close this update and hopefully this chapter of my life, I want to express my deepest gratitude. Life will undoubtedly throw more challenges my way, but I feel more equipped to handle them now, more aware of my strengths and my values, and more committed than ever to living a life that reflects them. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of my journey. Here's to moving forward, to learning, and to growing, no matter what comes our way.
I'm Cameron, and I grew up in the shadow of a star. That star was my older sister, Lily. Our house was always filled with people, aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. They'd pour into our backyard like ants to a picnic, drawn by the promise of my mom's famous barbecue and the chance to see Lily perform. Our backyard was like a stage, with its neatly trimmed lawn and the big oak tree that provided the perfect backdrop. Dad would fire up the grill, the smell of charcoal and sizzling meat filling the air, while Mom bustled around, making sure everyone had a drink in hand. "Lily, sweetie," Aunt Marge would call out, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Why don't you give us a little song?" And just like that, all eyes would turn to my sister. Lily would hop onto a chair, her golden curls bouncing, a mischievous glint in her eye. She'd clear her throat dramatically, and then, magic. "My heart will go on and on," she'd warble, doing her best Celine Dion impression. The adults would go wild, clapping and cheering like they were at a real concert. Mom and Dad would beam with pride, Dad often wiping a tear from his eye. Meanwhile, I'd be off to the side, trying to blend in with the bushes. It's not that I didn't want to join in, but every time I opened my mouth to sing, it sounded like a cat being strangled. And poetry? Forget about it. The words would tangle on my tongue, leaving me red-faced and stammering. I've heard my relatives whisper that I'm so unlike my sister. It wasn't just the relatives. Mom and Dad made it clear who the star of the family was. While Lily got shuttled from dance classes to singing lessons to art workshops, I was left to my own devices. Not that I minded much. I found solace in the dusty old books that lined our shelves. The only person who seemed to get me was Great Aunt Maggie. She'd find me hiding behind the garage or up in the treehouse, nose buried in a book. "What adventure are you on today, Cameron?" she'd ask, settling down beside me. I'd look up, grateful for the interruption. "Oh, just reading about ancient Egypt," I'd say, showing her the cover of my latest find. Maggie would nod, her eyes twinkling. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." Those moments with Maggie were like a balm to my soul. She didn't expect me to perform or be anyone other than who I was. With her, I could just be Cameron, the quiet, bookish girl who preferred the company of paper and ink to the chaos of family gatherings. But as much as I cherished those moments, they couldn't erase the sting of being the forgotten child. Every time Lily mastered a new song or won another award, my parents would shower her with praise and gifts. New clothes, the latest gadgets, you name it, Lily got it. And me? I got hand-me-downs and sighs of exasperation. School became my sanctuary. While I wasn't exactly Miss Popularity, I found my groove in the classroom. I wasn't content to just sit there and let the lessons wash over me. No, I was determined to understand every single thing the teachers said. Mrs. Thompson, I'd say after class, my voice quiet but steady, could you explain that bit about mitosis again? I didn't quite get it. She'd smile, obviously pleased by my interest. Of course, Cameron. Why don't we go over it together? If a teacher couldn't spare the time, I'd ask for book recommendations. Soon, my backpack was always bulging with extra reading material. I'd stay up late, poring over those books, determined to master every subject. All that hard work paid off. By the time I hit high school, I was top of my class. For once in my life, I was the best at something. I even made a few friends, other bookworms, who didn't mind my quiet ways. As graduation approached, our house became Lily Central. Mom was constantly helping her put together her portfolio for the advertising and PR program at some fancy college. "Oh, honey, this campaign idea is perfect," Mom would gush, looking at Lily's work. "You're so talented." I'd roll my eyes and retreat to my room, burying myself in my studies. But one night, during yet another family dinner devoted to Lily's college plans, something in me snapped. "I'm going to college too," I blurted out. "I want to study management." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, to my shock and hurt, they all burst out laughing. "Oh, sweetie," Mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "We don't have money for that. You'll need to get a job after graduation. You're just not as gifted as your sister." I felt like I'd been slapped. But I'm the top student in my class," I stammered, my face burning with anger and embarrassment. "I get straight A's." I stormed up to my room and came back with my report card, slamming it on the table. They all leaned in to look, their eyes widening in surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," Dad muttered, scratching his head. "When did this happen?" "It's been happening for years," I spat. "Not that any of you ever noticed." Mom at least had the decency to look ashamed. "Cameron, we had no idea." But Dad cut her off. "Look, it doesn't change anything. We've spent all our savings on Lily's education. There's nothing left for you, Cameron. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. You'll go to work at my cousin Frank's restaurant after graduation." I turned and ran, ignoring their calls. I sprinted up the stairs, into my room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. As I collapsed onto my bed, sobs racking my body, I felt something inside me harden. Fine, I thought, my hands clenching into fists. If they won't help me, I'll find another way. I'll show them all what Cameron can do. The next few months were a blur. Lily headed off to college, her departure marked by tearful goodbyes and proud parental embraces. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to graduate at the top of my class. During this time, I found myself spending more and more time with Great Aunt Maggie. Her small, cozy house became my refuge from the tension at home. One afternoon, as we sat in her sunlit kitchen sipping tea, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, Cameron," she said, her kind eyes fixed on me, "what are your plans after graduation?" I stared into my teacup, fighting back tears. I don't know, Aunt Maggie. Mom and Dad won't help me with college. They say there's no money left after paying for Lily's education." Maggie was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Cameron, dear, I've got some savings, I'd like to give them to you. For college. You're smart as a whip, and I'll be damned if I let that brain of yours go to waste." The reality of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I burst into tears, overwhelmed by her generosity and the sudden realization that my dreams weren't dead after all. Thank you, I sobbed, throwing my arms around her. Thank you so much, Aunt Maggie. The months flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across the stage at graduation, diploma in hand. As I scanned the crowd, I saw Aunt Maggie beaming at me. My parents were there too, looking proud but uncomfortable. That evening, as I pored over college brochures, Mom walked in. Cameron, honey, she said, her voice syrupy sweet, your father's cousin Frank called. He's got a waitressing job for you at his restaurant. Isn't that exciting? I took a deep breath. Actually, Mom, I won't be needing that job. I'm going to college. Dad appeared in the doorway, frowning. And how exactly do you plan to pay for that? Aunt Maggie is helping me, I said, my chin held high. She's giving me her savings for tuition. The shocked silence that followed was almost comical. Then, to my disbelief, Dad's face turned red with anger. Absolutely not, he bellowed. If Maggie's got money to spare, it should go to Lily. She needs a car for her job in advertising after she graduates next year. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? I spat. This is my chance to get an education, to make something of myself. Don't be selfish, Cameron, Mom chimed in. Your sister needs that money more than you do. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. This is my money now, and I'm using it for college. End of discussion. From that moment on, life at home became unbearable. My parents either ignored me completely or snapped at me over the smallest things. The tension was suffocating. After a particularly nasty argument, I called Aunt Maggie in tears and told her everything. Pack your bags, sweetheart, she said without hesitation. You're moving in with me. The next day, I stuffed everything I owned into a cab and drove away, watching my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror. As I pulled up to Aunt Maggie's house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The summer flew by in a whirlwind of preparation, and before I knew it, I was stepping onto the campus of State University. Thanks to my stellar grades and Aunt Maggie's generosity, I'd gotten into the management program I'd always dreamed of. My first day of classes, I felt like I was floating on air. As I sat in my introduction to business lecture, drinking in every word, I couldn't help but think, I made it. I'm really here. Meanwhile, Lily was starting her senior year at her fancy college. I hadn't heard much from her or my parents since I'd moved out, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too busy reveling in my newfound freedom and the excitement of college life. But then, about a month into the semester, Aunt Maggie called me. Cameron, dear, she said, her voice hesitant, I think you should sit down for this. My heart raced as she filled me in on the family drama I'd missed. Apparently, Lily had shown up at home out of the blue, announcing she'd dropped out of college. The reason? She was pregnant. According to Aunt Maggie, Lily had been flippant about the whole thing. Oh, don't worry, she'd said, tossing her hair. The baby's father is loaded. We'll be getting married soon. But the story didn't end there. It turned out Lily's boyfriend wasn't as committed as she'd thought. When he found out she'd been sleeping with his friend too, all hell broke loose. Now they don't even know who the father is, Aunt Maggie sighed. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process it all. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, the golden child had fallen from her pedestal. But mostly, I just felt sad for Lily and the mess she'd gotten herself into. The saga continued over the next few months. Aunt Maggie kept me updated on all the gossip from the family gatherings I no longer attended. When Lily's baby was born, a DNA test confirmed her boyfriend was indeed the father. But instead of the fairy tale wedding Lily had envisioned, he simply agreed to pay child support. The final blow came when Lily, desperate for work, took a job as a waitress at Uncle Frank's restaurant, the very job my parents had tried to foist on me. As I hung up the phone, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. There was a small, petty part of me that wanted to gloat, to rub my success in my family's faces. But mostly, I just felt a profound sense of gratitude for where I was and how far I'd come. 4 years flew by in a blur of lectures, exams, and late-night study sessions. Before I knew it, I was walking across the stage at graduation, my hard-earned management degree clutched tightly in my hand. As I scanned the crowd, I saw Aunt Maggie beaming at me, tears of pride in her eyes. Thanks to my top grades and glowing recommendations from my professors, I landed a job as a manager at the Gilded Fork, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. The salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly successful. With my first paycheck, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I marched into the electronics store and bought the latest smartphone for Aunt Maggie. Her face lit up when I presented it to her. "Oh, Cameron," she gasped, turning the sleek device over in her hands. "This is too much." I grinned, already pulling out my own phone. "Not at all. Now, let me show you how to use it." Over the next few weeks, I taught Aunt Maggie the ins and outs of social media. She took to it like a duck to water, especially loving Facebook's video feature. Soon, her page was filled with clips of her garden, her cat, and her infamous apple pie in various stages of creation. I'd watch her videos during my lunch breaks, always making sure to leave a comment or a like. It was our way of staying connected, even when work kept me busy. One day, as I was preparing for the dinner rush, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, surprised to see my mother's name on the screen. We hadn't spoken in years. "Cameron?" Her voice was hesitant. We were hoping you might come over to talk." After a long pause, I agreed. That Sunday, I found myself standing on the porch of my childhood home, my hand hovering over the doorbell. Before I could press it, the door swung open. "Cameron!" My mother pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetie, it's so good to see you." Inside, I found my father, Lily, and a toddler I assumed was my niece. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile like I'd feared. "You look good, kiddo," Dad said, his voice gruff but warm. "We hear you're doing well for yourself." I nodded, still wary. "I am. I'm a manager at the Gilded Fork now." Their eyes widened at the name of the restaurant. Mom cleared her throat. That's wonderful, dear. Actually, that's part of why we wanted to talk to you." Over the next hour, they apologized for how they'd treated me, admitting they'd been wrong to dismiss my potential. Then came the real reason for the reunion. "Cameron," Mom said, glancing at Lily, we were wondering if you might be able to help Lily get a job at your restaurant." I looked at my sister, bouncing her daughter on her knee. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'll see what I can do," I said finally. "No promises, but I'll ask." True to my word, I spoke to Mr. Reeves, the restaurant owner, about Lily. To my surprise, he agreed to give her a shot as an administrator. Lily started the following week. I watched her closely, half expecting her to fail or cause drama. But to my shock, she excelled. She was punctual, efficient, and the customers loved her charm. As the weeks passed, I found myself relaxing around her. We weren't best friends by any means, but we developed a cordial working relationship. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, the universe decided to throw me another curveball, this time, a positive one. Mr. Reeves called me into his office one day. My heart raced, wondering if I'd done something wrong. Instead, he grinned at me and said, "Cameron, how would you like to help me expand the business?" Before I knew it, I was overseeing the opening of not one, but 3 new restaurants. My days became a whirlwind of staff meetings, menu tastings, and number crunching. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and everything I'd ever dreamed of. The promotion came with a significant pay bump, and suddenly, I found myself with more money than I knew what to do with. That's when the calls from my parents started. At first, it was just small things. "The roof is leaking," Mom would say, her voice hesitant. "We were wondering if you might be able to help out a little." I was surprised at how good it felt to say yes, to be able to solve their problems with a simple transfer of funds. It started with the roof, then it was a new water heater, and before long, I was funding a complete home renovation. As their financial situation improved, thanks to my monthly allowance, the infamous family party started up again. But this time, when I attended, things were different. Have you heard about Cameron's latest project? Mom would gush to the relatives. She's opening a new restaurant downtown. We're so proud of her. I'd catch Lily's eye across the room, and she'd give me a small smile. She was doing well too, having been promoted to head administrator at the Gilded Fork. My girls, Dad would say, an arm around each of us. Both of them making their old man proud. Part of me wanted to be bitter, to remind them of how they'd treated me before. But a larger part reveled in the warmth of their approval, something I'd craved for so long. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. Finally, after all these years, I had what I'd always wanted, success in my career and the love and appreciation of my family. I was the golden child now, but better than that, I was my own woman, standing on my own 2 feet. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world came crashing down around me. I was scrolling through Facebook, sipping my coffee, when I saw that Aunt Maggie had posted a new video. It was from one of the family gatherings I'd missed due to work commitments. Smiling, I clicked play, expecting to see the usual scenes of laughter and merriment. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. There, in living color, were my parents, their faces flushed with alcohol and self-righteousness. Mom was gesticulating wildly, her voice slurred but unmistakable. And Cameron, that ungrateful little freeloader, she was saying, she barely gives us anything. We're not made of money, you know. Dad chimed in, his face red. That's right. We're doing just fine, thanks to our Lily. She's the one keeping that fancy restaurant afloat. Cameron just rides on her coattails. The video continued, with various relatives nodding along, some even adding their own criticisms. Lily sat in the corner, looking uncomfortable, but not contradicting them. As the video ended, I sat there, stunned. How could they? After everything I'd done for them, all the money I'd given them, how could they turn around and say such awful, untrue things? With shaking hands, I scrolled down to the comments. There, I saw a stream of messages from my parents. Maggie, delete this video right now. You had no right to post this. Take it down immediately. But Aunt Maggie's response made me burst into tears. I don't know how to delete videos, and even if I did, I wouldn't. It's time everyone saw the truth about how you treat Cameron. She's the one supporting you, and this is how you repay her kindness? Shame on you both. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the video, reading and rereading the comments. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed Aunt Maggie's number. Oh, Cameron, dear, she said when she answered, her voice full of sympathy. I take it you've seen the video? Yeah, I croaked, my voice raw from crying. I can't believe it, Aunt Maggie. How could they? I could hear the anger in her voice as she replied, they've always been like this, Cameron. You just haven't been around to see it. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but maybe it's for the best. You deserve to know the truth. We talked for hours, Aunt Maggie comforting me as I cycled through shock, anger, and grief. As night fell, I made a decision. I'm cutting them off, I told Aunt Maggie, my voice firm despite the pain in my heart. No more money, no more help. They made their bed, now they can lie in it. The days following the video revelation were some of the hardest of my life. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Their words, so cruel and untrue, played on a loop in my mind. Finally, after a week of silence, I sent them a brief, cold text. I've seen the video. I know what you really think of me. Don't contact me again. The money stops now. Their responses came flooding in immediately. At first, they were apologetic. Cameron, sweetie, we're so sorry. We didn't mean any of it. Please forgive us. But as the days passed and I maintained my silence, their tune changed. We're your parents. You owe us. Each message twisted the knife deeper, but I stood firm. I'd given them chance after chance, and they'd thrown it all back in my face. It was time to break the cycle. Lily, surprisingly, stayed out of it. At work, she was the model employee, efficient and professional. If she harbored any resentment over the loss of our parents' financial support, she didn't show it. Our interactions remained cordial but distant. "I'm not taking sides," she told me one day after a staff meeting. "It's between you and them." I nodded, appreciating her neutrality even if part of me wished she'd stand up for me. But I understood. She had her own child to think about now. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself leaning heavily on Aunt Maggie. Our Sunday video calls became the highlight of my week. She'd regale me with stories from her garden or her latest baking adventure, providing a much-needed dose of normalcy in the chaos my life had become. "You're doing the right thing, Cameron," she'd assure me when doubts crept in. "Don't let them manipulate you anymore." To my surprise, other relatives began reaching out too. Cousin Sarah, who'd always been kind to me at family gatherings, sent me a heartfelt email. "I saw the video. I want you to know I think you're amazing, Cameron. What you've achieved, how you've helped everyone, you're an inspiration. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Uncle Bob, Dad's brother, called me out of the blue. "Kid, I've watched you grow up and become this incredible woman. Your parents are fools if they can't see how special you are. You've got family in your corner, remember that." These messages of support were like balm to my wounded heart. I realized that while I might have lost my parents, I'd gained a family who appreciated me for who I truly was. As the year drew to a close, Mr. Reeves called me into his office. I went in nervous, wondering if the family drama had somehow affected my work performance. Instead, he smiled broadly and said, "Cameron, I'm retiring next year. I want you to take over as CEO of the restaurant group." I stood there, shocked into silence. Finally, I managed to stammer out, Are you sure?" He nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've earned this, Cameron. You're the reason this business has flourished. It's time you took the reins." As I left his office, my head spinning with possibilities, I realized something profound. The little girl who'd been overlooked and underestimated had grown into a woman who'd surpassed everyone's expectations, including her own.